There we go. Okay. Now, let me just get started. Here we go. So, who is ICCP? And what do we do? The Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners is a professional members organization that recognizes those with the skills and qualifications in the professional management of construction claims. The ICCP has three primary objectives, which are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained the appropriate knowledge and skills in the management of claims, and to educate those who would like to gain that knowledge and move into the management of claims. And why is there the need for the ICCP when there are so many construction organizations? Well, quite simply, construction claims have become a key part of the international construction industry, but claims practitioners come from a variety of backgrounds, from engineering, quantity surveying, project management, legal, et cetera, and until the ICCP, I cannot speak today, I'm very sorry, until the ICCP was established, there was no institute that specifically recognized those who have the specialist knowledge, experience, and skills to manage, prepare, and respond to claims to the highest level of professionalism. Okay, I'm not going to introduce each member of our steering committee. I will just point out that we have 5 elected fellows, as well as an elected president, and our presenter today, Andy Hewitt, is the executive officer. We have 3 levels of individual membership that each have their own set of criteria, in addition to the special levels of student member and graduate member for those who are just completing their initial qualification in the construction industry. We also have corporate membership for those who have companies or departments that specialize in construction claims. And what is in it for the members? We have a private members area that has a knowledge bank of white papers, articles, etc., on claims topics. We have a list of further education and training opportunities, which are not offered by us, but it just collects the information into one easy to find location. We also have a bookshop. Again, we do not sell books, we just review and provide links to the latest industry releases. We have a template library to help our members not only save time, but also ensure that their claims are completed to the highest degree of professionalism. We have regular CPD opportunities such as this one. And most of our CPD sessions are open to the public. However, a CPD certificate is a benefit of membership. Here we have the ICCP Academy, which are member-only webinars, which we offer on slightly more technical topics, driven by member requests and needs. And these help provide information and training that members can take away and use straight away in their work. We offer savings on books and further training with publishers and our training partner Claims Class. We have a monthly newsletter that keeps our members up to date on the latest in the industry. We offer industry exposure in the form of a public listing of members, as well as a certificate of membership and a logo, which members can use. We also have a private LinkedIn group where members can discuss their contracts and claims questions in a confidential setting and get the expertise of their fellow members. Finally, we have the optional benefit of our Register of Claims Practitioners, which is a popular option with our consultant members. And I realized that was a very quick spin through what we have to offer. If you requested further information when you registered for today's session, you will be receiving an email from me with more information. However, if you did not, you may visit our website, instituteccp.com. You may email hello@instituteccp.com or membership@instituteccp.com and get all of your questions answered. And with that whirlwind tour of the ICCP, I will now hand over to today's presenter, Andy Hewitt. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for that very nice introduction. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen for the presentation?
No, I cannot. I cannot see your face or your screen.
Right, just one moment. Let me get the technical stuff. Maybe I've got to reshare it. Let's go. Thanks for the introduction. And for people that are not aware of the ICCP and you are dealing with claims, just a couple more words, really. You can get lots of information about what we do and how we help people on the website. But the other thing is, we are not like a lot of these large organisations, and I won't name any names, where you pay high fees for your membership subscriptions, and then you don't really get a lot out of them. We are a small, friendly organisation. You get to speak to people. You know, we pride ourselves with giving individual attention to our members. So please, if you are interested please have a look at the website, see what's in it for you, and please get in touch. We will get back to you within a couple of days on any inquiries and help you and advise you. So enough of that. We're here to talk about prevention of disputes on our construction projects. And let's just start off with looking at the downside of disputes. According to Dr. Niall Bunny, who was a very well-known arbitrator internationally at the FIDIC conference a few years ago, if you have if you have to go to arbitration to claim your rights, you're going to be looking at spending between £150,000 and £200,000 per day of the arbitration. So on something like a typical 10-day arbitration, you can see you might be spending $2 million on the arbitration itself. And that could work out to be between 12.5% and 38% of the claim value. So if you're claiming something, you might be spending a third on just obtaining your dues and your rights. If we look at the Dispute Review Board statistics, the cost of arbitration might be between 10 and 15% of the project value. So if we look at the profit margins that contractors make on a typical construction project, most of your profit could be wiped out just by the very fact that you've had to go to arbitration. And then, of course, as well as the hard costs, we've got the hidden costs of getting into disputes. So we've got employees' time and effort in preparing for the dispute or the arbitration or whatever. The time and effort of consultants that you may need to assist you through the dispute. And obviously consultants come at a fairly high cost for their expertise. If we are in a dispute, we are almost inevitably going to lose goodwill with our client, the employer. And you may be worried about gaining a reputation of being a claims conscious contractor or a claims conscious employer, which will damage your reputation. And of course, you know, that goes with loss of goodwill as well. So the point of this webinar is how can we help to prevent disputes from occurring at the outsets of our projects? And this information is applicable to both the contracting side of the fence and the employer consultant side of the fence. So the first thing we need to do, and this really is driven by the employer and often the employer's consultants who will be advising the employer on the selection of the best form of contract for the project in hand. We have internationally many organisations such as FIDIC, the JCT, the NEC, and in your individual countries, possibly domestic form of robust forms of contract, and these will often have been created for different contracting strategies. So we can have something, your most common one is where the employer provides the design to the contractor and the contractor simply builds it to that design. We can have where the employer contracts with the contractor not only to build the facility or project, but to also design it to the criteria which has been set out by the employer in the employer's requirements. We can have a turnkey operation where the employer is not really concerned about the details of the project, what it looks like, how long it takes to build. They're really only concerned about will it perform in accordance with what I want, and how much is it going to cost, and of course how long is it going to take before I can start to use the project. So there are hands-off employers that are usually prepared to pay a little bit more for the project, but don't really want a great deal of involvement, and are just going to say to the contractor, there's the price, there's the contract, give me a call when it's done, when you can hand over the keys and I can start to use the facility. Similar to turnkey, we have design, build and operate, but this is where the contractor is also contracted to not only design it and build it, but to actually operate the facility for a period of maybe 10, 20 years. This could be applicable to power generation. I've seen it used quite a lot on district cooling operations, the various scenarios that this would work with. Do we have an employer that wants certainty or a high degree of certainty on time or on budget? Or is the employer more concerned about controlling the costs and it is not willing to pay for the additional risk that the contractor may undertake if it's a less risk adverse type of contract for the employer? We can look at remeasurable contracts where the contractor tenders on estimated quantities and is paid for the as-built situation, so it's paid for exactly what he provides, including any variations and changes. Or does the employer prefer to have a lump sum, often in the mistaken belief that this will be a lower price? Generally it won't be. A remeasurable will often turn out to be, or usually turn out to be brought in at a lower price because the contractor is not taking the risk of inaccurate or estimated quantities when he prices the works. Are we talking about a complicated project such as an airport terminal or a power generation plant or a hospital, or are we talking about small, uncomplicated works? Well, the thing I've got to say here is if you're involved in selecting the form of contract for the contractor to enter into, is that always it's going to be better and have less propensity for conflict if you go with one of the standard forms of construction projects such as FIDIC or the other ones I've mentioned, because if you sit down and start with a blank piece of paper, you're not working from experience, and either bespoke, i.e. completely new contracts for the project, or a situation where we take a standard form and we modify it heavily, tend not to work well. They tend to contain ambiguous provisions, conflicts, etc., etc. And to be honest, if we're starting with this sort of contract, we are heading down the road of contention and possibly dispute. One of the things that employers need to be aware of, and I've been beating this drum for many, many years, is the employment of consultants. The consultants to carry out the design, the consultants to administer the project, and under FIDIC, they would become the engineer or the employer's representative. If you employ a good consultant, it's not going to cost you in overall project terms a great deal more by trying to save a few dollars by employing a poor consultant, which will have less qualified and experienced staff. That's how they keep the cost down. So if we look at it in overall terms and look at it sensibly in terms of the project, always go for the best consultants with a good track record, because they'll not make a great deal to your budget, but if the project is managed badly, it can have a huge effect in terms of the final cost, because those consultants won't be managing the project professionally and to the best of good practice, and that can often cause disputes, variations, changes to the project, claims, etc., etc., and all these things will serve to push up the final cost. If we are compiling a contract which is a standard form, very often we will want, as the employer, to actually change some of the conditions. So if we're going to change the standard conditions of contract, or if we're going to start with a blank page and we're going to create a bespoke contract for the project, one of the things that I see happen quite frequently is the person or persons in charge of drafting out the contract or the changed conditions doesn't have a great deal of experience in contractual matters, possibly doesn't have the language of the contract as a first language, and this can result in a lot of conflicts, a lot of ambiguities where people aren't really sure what a clause actually means. So again, pay more money and get an expert to carry out any changes to the standard forms of contract, or to actually write your conditions. Let's look at the contract documents, and the contract documents as a whole, just very briefly, will comprise of the 1 or 2 page agreement, which is signed by the executives of the contractor and the employer, something like the appendix to tender, which contains the details of the contract duration, the percentage to be held in retention, the defects liability period, etc., etc. These are details that are specific to the particular project. We'd probably have our general conditions of contract, such as the FIDIC or the JCT or the ICE, and then changes to those standard conditions which are made in the particular conditions of contract. We'll then, on a design by the employer project, would have the specifications, which details the quality of the work, the drawings, which details what we're going to build, possibly a bill of quantities or a schedule of rates, which is a breakdown of the contractor's price, and then we may have other documents which are incorporated into the contract documents as a whole. The contract documents should always be compiled and signed as soon as possible after the agreement has been reached. So I've worked on projects where it takes months and months and months, and even one project where we got to the end of the project and agreed everything before the contract documents still weren't signed. This is really bad practice. We need to reach the agreement after the tender negotiations and then get the contract documents nailed down, signed, and working copies available on the site. The contract documents are often based on the tender documents, but the thing we've got to remember here is they are not the tender documents. It's the usual case. We send out the tender documents. The tenderers will raise queries because they're not sure of things, particularly if we've not based them on a standard form of contract. The person responsible for managing the tender will reply to those queries and copy everybody in on it. It could well be that the employer, the engineer or whatever, wants to make changes to the documents during the tender period and maybe issue additional or changed drawings, revised specifications, etc., etc. Once the employer and maybe the lowest tenderer or the lowest couple of tenderers have entered negotiations, things will eventually change again. The contractor might offer a reduction in his tendered price in exchange for maybe some changes in the contract conditions. Possibly he will negotiate reduced payment periods or something like that. And the point I'm trying to get here is that all these changes as a result of tender queries, tender bulletins, negotiation, need to be incorporated into the documents so that the contract documents reflect any changes during that period. Because for the next 2, possibly 3 years, we will constantly need to refer to the contract documents, and they should correctly reflect the agreement between the two parties. I mentioned on the last slide was the other documents, and there's a propensity for people, and again, this is when we're using inexperienced, poorly qualified people to compile the contract documents. I see it happen on a frequent basis. We get all the documents that are being created during the tender period, the request for information, the responses, the tender bulletins, the letters, the meeting minutes during the negotiation period. And instead of amending the documents to include what's been agreed and what's been changed via these documents, which is the correct practice, they just take all these documents, put them in a file and call them any other documents, and seem to think that that will change the tender documents to the contract document. It is not the case. Just putting all these documents within the contract document somewhere is really terrible practice. Because I'll give you an example. Tenderer raises a query on a specification. The employer or the employer's consultants then responds and says, this specification in the tender document is not appropriate. Here's a revised specification. Now, if that revised specification is not included within the specification that becomes the contract document, and it's just included in a tender bulletin in a file labeled other documents, when we're building the project, which specification are we going to refer to? The busy engineers on site will, as a matter of fact, refer to the specification under the specification, which is actually being revised. So they will be working to the wrong document. We should keep a control set of contract documents on the site. When I was a project manager or a contracts manager, they always lived in my office. Anybody could borrow them so long as they put them back. But we always had a place where we could go to see what is included in the contract. If we have been given as contractors a badly prepared set of contract documents, it's an important thing to do is to go through the documents and annotate them to say, for example, this specification section has been revised, refer to tender bulletin number 3. So anybody picking up the documents will be directed to the latest version and what was actually signed up to within the contract. So that was contract documents. One of the first things we're going to do when the project kicks off is to create a program of how as a contractor, how the contractor is going to execute the project. And this is this initial program is what I refer to as the baseline program. Most forms of contract will require this to be submitted within a stipulated time frame. FIDIC 99, for example, says within 28 days of the letter of award. Engineers, in this presentation, when I refer to the engineer, I mean the party appointed by the employer to administer the contract on their behalf. But engineers have got to be realistic about the level of detail, especially on a complicated project, that the contractor can actually produce within 28 days. Again, we've got to be realistic. Maybe the planner has just been mobilized to the project. He hasn't had time to actually study with the construction personnel what we're building and how we're going to build it. With the contractor's not got his major subcontractors on board, which he will need to confer with in order to produce a good workable program. So please be realistic about what we're expecting the contractor to produce within a short time period. Just going back to that, maybe the contractor can produce a 2 or 3 month detailed look ahead and then work on the detail of the program after that period over the coming weeks. maybe you can produce within 28 days a high-level program and then flesh it out to a more detailed program once we've got that high level agreed. It's important to establish this baseline program because, as well as being the contractor's plan to execute and complete the project, the program is going to be a living, breathing document which will become a yardstick, or going back to it, a baseline against to which to measure any delays, what our progress is doing. Are we keeping on track with the program? Are we slipping? Are we actually getting in front of it? Have we got changed work that needs to be built into the program? Have we got extensions of time that have been awarded so the completion date changes? So very important to establish this at the beginning. And one other thing that I see happen is that the contractor submits his program, maybe is a bit late, and in that time things have happened on the project and the engineer says, well, we didn't give you, or you weren't given possession of the site on that date, so change your program to reflect what actually happened. And we've issued 3 variation instructions, and build those into your program as well. And of course, we don't want to change to the completion date. That is wrong. And contractors, if the engineer is pressurizing you to include post-contract events within your program, push back at that. The first thing we need to establish is the program in accordance with the intentions of the parties when the contract was agreed, not necessarily signed, but when the terms and conditions and everything was agreed. Of course, sorry, that's really what was covered in this final bullet point. Of course, things do happen on the project, and it's frequently necessary to revise the program. So we started with the baseline, and then we've got a delayed handover of the site, and we've got 3 variations that have been included. So if circumstances affect the program, such as late handover or variation instructions, if we've got additional work, if the contractor now is spoken to his major subcontractors, have come up with a faster, better, cheaper way of actually carrying out the works, well, we need to revise the program. And it is a propensity of contractors to stick with the original program and fail to revise it when things happen on the project, which really need a new plan or a revised plan for execution. And of course, if we've claimed an extension of time and that's been awarded, we've now got a new completion date, and the program needs to reflect the new completion date that everybody's working to. Updated programs. This is where we take the current program that we're working to and update it for the as-built situation, the actual start times, finish times and progress up to a particular date. So up to the date we've got actuals. After the date, the program will run its magic through the programming software and predict the time for completion based on the logic of the program. So if we are going to keep on top of how we are doing, how is our progress compared to our planned progress, we need to prepare as contractors updated programs so that we know exactly where we are. And as a project manager, I always needed to know from my planner on a regular basis, minimum monthly, possibly 2 weekly or even weekly, how are we doing? And the planner will do his things, and he'll come along and say, well, in the last month, we've slipped 1 week. My question then is, why have we slipped 1 week? And the planner might say to me, well, the tower crane broke down and we couldn't get materials up to the higher floors of the building. Well, in that case, that's something, I know it's my fault, I've got to deal with that, and maybe I've got to come with some plans to recover that 1 week delay so that the project as a whole doesn't remain in delay. The planner may say, well, we got the site handed over late and we've been instructed 3 variations which will need additional time. That's fine. I know why. We can then kick off our contract administration systems to send notices to the engineer and start to think about submitting a claim for an extension of time. So the updated programs are such an important tool, both for the contractor's internal information and to share with the engineer and the employer on how we're doing based on existing progress. So I've really covered that bullet point. An updated program or as-built program will record the progress up to the data date and predict the event after the data date of the update. One thing that frequently I see contractors will produce an update, and then the project manager will say to the planner, yeah, okay, we know about that, but take it away and make it not show any delays. If you are going to do that as a contractor, you're digging yourself a big hole. We need to be accurate, we need to tell the truth, and we need to share the truth with the engineer and the employer, because the updated program is going to identify delays. It's going to identify the cause of the delays. It's going to identify the person responsible for the delays. It will enable mitigating action to be taken and identify the party responsible. So it could well be the tower crane broke down. We're going to have to work a couple of weekends to mitigate that delay. Or these days, delays are the responsibility of the employer. We need to think about preparing an extension of time claim. And also, we will need an updated program if we do go in for an extension of time claim. An accurate delay analysis will be based on the progress, i.e. the updated program, immediately before the delay took place. So if we are pursuing an extension of time, one of the basis of the delay analysis will be the latest updated program. From the employer side, if there is going to be delay to the time for completion, doesn't matter who's responsible for the delay and who is going to be held accountable for the delay. But obviously the employer needs to make arrangements to start to use the facility or to sell it to its end users, and he needs to have the eye on the latest predicted time for completion so he can make the appropriate arrangement. So program and planning, extremely important as a way of avoiding disputes. Records. I would say, and this is not my thinking, it's been in use for many years in the construction industry. I first heard this many, many years ago, but the three most important things in preparing a claim or a response to a claim are good records. Number two, good records. And maybe you've guessed what number three would be. Yes, good records. What types of records will we have, or should we have, on a typical construction project? Well, obviously correspondence records an awful lot of things that have been going on and have gone on. Meeting minutes will record what was agreed, what was discussed, current situation in any meeting. Submittals of drawings for approval, shop drawings, material approval requests, etc., etc. Method statements, how we're going to build the project. Very important here, daily, weekly, monthly site reports. What was going on? What resources did we have deployed to the project? What activities were in progress, started or completed? Any problems that we have? Any instructions that we received, what the weather was like, etc., etc., on a daily basis. Materials that were delivered to site are major materials anyway. Plant returns, what plant and equipment has been deployed to the site, what it was doing, was it being serviced, was it standing idle, was it working on this or that activity. Same thing for labour, and labour of the main contractor and the subcontractors, and the labour designations, were they masons, were they carpenters, electricians, etc., etc. Progress photographs, programme updates, which we've discussed in detail. So these are just typical of the sort of records we should be setting up within our contract administration systems as contractors, and of course also as the engineer. You need to have your own contract administration system set up, because you may have to deal with disputes or claims or similar sort of things, and you will need your version of the events. Notices. Well, I have to say, in many, many years of dealing with contractual matters, claims and disputes, that failure to submit notices of claims on time and in the correct form, should say form, not from, is one of the most frequent mistakes made by contractors and one of the easiest defences to a claim. So it's very important is if your contract says you must send a notice in certain circumstances, and particularly applicable to notices of claim, if that is a condition precedent to entitlement, i.e., if you don't send a notice of claim, you will not be entitled to any award of any additional time or money, we need to be aware of this. So, what is good practice for the submission of notices? And despite it might give you requirements within the contract, but even if it doesn't, here is my advice for complying with good practice. Submitted in the format of a letter or another formal document. You could even create a template that says this is a notice on the top. It clearly states that the communication, whatever the document is a notice. Identify it as being a notice. Contain a reference to the contractual clause or clauses under which the notice is submitted. And a good way to word a notice, it's not the contractor giving the engineer or the employer notice, it's the other way. As required by subclause 1.9, delayed drawings or instructions, we hereby give you notice that. Now, what are we doing here? The wording of the notice is non-confrontational. We're not finger pointing. We're not allocating blame here. We are just saying we are obliged by the contract to give you a notice. And that takes the sting from the receipt of the notice by the engineer or the employer. And they don't like to receive notices. Often it's something, the notice is sent as a result of something that they've done incorrectly. We need to clearly describe the events or circumstances giving rise to the notice, and within that we need to record the date of the event, because notices are always going to be referred to in claims and disputes. So they need to be clear and be understandable, not by the person writing the notice or receiving the notice, but by somebody reading them out in court in 3 years' time. They should also, we need to check the contract, but very often contracts will give a requirement for the submission of important documents such as notices to a certain address of the engineer, which may or may not be the site address, and by a specific means of communication. It could be by paper delivered by hand, or by recorded delivery, or these days more frequently through the electronic document management system that's been adopted for the project. But when we're sending a notice or a certificate or whatever, we need to make sure that we are complying with the contract. If we do get to a dispute and we're in arbitration, failure to submit the notice is something that will be picked up by the lawyers, and they will say it wasn't delivered to the correct address. It didn't say that it was a notice on the document, so therefore it doesn't exist. And then we can spend a lot of money and time arguing about whether it was a notice, whether it was a compliant notice, and ultimately whether the claimant is entitled to an award. A great management tool is to maintain, as the contractor or the engineer, to maintain a register of notices of claim. And by listing all the notices in a log or in a schedule, and what has happened next. Have we submitted the claim? Is the claim under preparation? Have we actually withdrawn the notice? Because when we looked at things in more detail, we found out that it wasn't going to delay the project. After all, we can absorb it within the program. But we were obliged to send a notice in the first place to use an expression, reserve our rights. So yeah, always prepare and maintain a register of notice. Claim submissions. What is a claim in the first place? Well, a claim is simply asking for something that you are entitled to be awarded under the contract or at law. So it is simply asking for what you are due to. So the way that we ask in construction projects is to actually submit a claim. And the claim is either going to be for an extension of time or for additional payment for something. And quite frequently, both the two, an extension of time and payment. Firstly, if there is a requirement to submit the claim within specific timeframes, we need to observe those timeframes. The worst thing we can do as contractors is to leave all the claims till the end of the project. And typically, as consultants helping contractors with their claims, we'll be consulted at month 22 on a 24-month project when the contractor has woken up to the fact that he's not going to complete on time, he is going to have delay penalties applied, but there have been delays for which the employer takes the responsibility. So they come along to a consultant such as ours, or maybe bring some experts in from head office, and they are saying, we need an extension of time. Otherwise, we're going to have delay damages, etc., etc. That is the wrong mentality. You should claim your claims not when you need more time or more money or both, but when you become entitled to the extension of time and the additional payment. And that is through the life of the project. And the mantra is one event, one claimable event, one claim. If you leave it till the end of the project, you will end up having to prepare an extension of time claim for maybe 6, maybe even 10 delay events. This then becomes a big thing to actually prepare the claim and a big thing to get a response to the claim. For at the end of the project, the people who have the knowledge and are due to responsible to respond to the claim maybe have been demobilized. So who's going to actually respond to the claim? Plus, when you've handed the project over to the employer, is the employer going to be encouraged to give you more time and give you more money? So there are many, many reasons why we should submit one claim for each event when we become entitled to make the claim and not leave them to the end. I've already mentioned this, separate claims should be submitted for each event, not consolidated claims. The other thing about consolidated claims, if we submit an extension of time claims for maybe 6 delay events and it's consolidated into one large claim, 2 of the delay events might be easy wins. Nobody can argue about them, and the effect is easy to demonstrate. 2 of them, the employer might disagree with completely and will contest the matter, and 2 of them might be somewhere in between. Yeah, they may be entitlement, maybe it did delay the project, maybe it did cost the contractor to incur additional costs, but it's not so clear cut. And what's going to happen there is the 2 easy wins won't get awarded because we're going to be arguing about the 2 grey areas and the 2 that the employer is going to contest. So if we'd have submitted 6 individual claims, at least we'll have had the 2 easy wins awarded. We can start to negotiate the grey ones, and maybe we've got to back down from the highly contested ones. So another reason why we should submit separate claims. When we are asking for something that we are entitled to, there's an awful lot of work goes into a successful claim. So when we are submitting our claim, we need to include an adequate examination of the cause, what happened on the project, the effect of that event on the time or the contractor's costs, and entitlement to an award. If the tower crane breaks down, can I claim for an extension of time? Well, the answer is no, because there's no entitlement to me as a contractor to claim for something for which I'm responsible. If the employer hands the site over to the contractor late, and this affects the time for completion, there will be a clause within the contract, so most good forms of contract, which will allow the contractor to claim an extension of time. So entitlement is fairly clear cut. But whatever happens, all of these things should be adequately explained, adequately substantiated, to enable the respondent to the claim to come to a decision. And this is typically the engineer who has to look at that claim, and then at the end of his examination, his findings, to be able to make a decision. Yes, the contractors are entitled, but maybe I think he's overstated the time. I think he should be entitled to an award of less than he's asking. And then be able to go to the employer and say, we've got the contractor's claim, I've examined it, in my impartial position, I think that the contractor is entitled to the extension of time, but not for 100 days, but for 80 days, because. Given that the employers employed that person as a construction professional to give him advice, the employer would be happy, or should be happy, to actually come to an agreement on the matter, having been given the advice of usually the engineer. But of course, if the engineer has been given a claim that is inadequately expressed and can't come to that conclusion, well, he's not going to be confident in either advising the employer or making an award. So your claims need to be properly and professionally prepared, and need to contain an examination of cause, effect, entitlement, and need to be adequately substantiated. And by substantiated, everything that you say within the claim has to be proven by including, remember those 3 very important things: copies of the good records. We're going round in circles here, but all these things contribute to dispute and contention free projects. Again, as a register of notices of claim, we should maintain a register of claims. So the claims that have been prepared and submitted, how much they were for, when they were submitted, when the engineer's response is due, when the engineer's response was received, what the engineer's findings are on the claim, whether they've been agreed, whether they are contested, should I say, etc., etc. So again, the maintenance of a register of claims is a very important management tool, and we can use it. We can use it if we go to a commercial meeting. We can use it as a tool. We can sit down and, Mr. Contractor, you've given us a notice of claim. Your claim for this is due on this date. Is it under preparation? Yes, it is. Or maybe no, we might be a bit late, but we are working on it. Or, Mr. Engineer, we submitted a claim on this date. The contract says you need to respond to it within 42 days, which was last week. When are you going to give us your response? Okay, you see how we're managing things. We're keeping things transparent. We're opening communication, but at least when we're aware of what's going on, we can deal with things. Moving on to claim responses, because I see an awful lot of disputes that are brought about by inadequately expressed claims, but I also see an awful lot of disputes that are started because the engineer has not responded to the claim in an adequate way. So if you are on the other side of the fence and you're responsible for responding to disputes and safeguarding your client, the employer's interests, things that you need to be aware of. Firstly, they need to be responded to within the timeframes included in the contract. FIDIC, for example, in 1999 says engineers must respond to the claim within 42 days of them being submitted. Let's just go back on there. Again, we see frequently engineers won't respect those timeframes, and we'll leave all the claims in a pile and say we'll negotiate at the end of the project. That is totally outside the contract. The engineers in this case are not complying with their contractual obligations. You are not doing the employer any favours, because if you don't award extensions of time and we have a new time for completion, the contractor may then have an additional claim for constructive acceleration. He's entitled to new time to extend the time, but he's not being awarded an extension of time, so contractually is obliged to meet the original completion date, for which you would need to accelerate. The employer needs to know when he's going to get the project and how much his budget is going to be affected by the claim. And if you ignore the claim, you are not giving that information to the employer. Responses should not comply of a one-page letter, your claim is rejected, full stop. I'm sure we've all seen these. If we are going to convince the claimant, the contractor, and the employer, who is ultimately responsible for the paying out for the claim or having his project extended, time extended, we have got to set down our reasons as to why we agree, if we agree with the claim, why we disagree if we're going to reject the claim, and why we agree with the principles of the claim, but think that the amount in terms of time and money is a lesser amount for which the contractor has claimed. We've got to convince the contractor and the employer that our findings as the respondent to the claim, the engineer, if you don't agree with me and you raise a dispute, you will fail when you raise that dispute. So the response has got to be detailed. It's not your claim is rejected, it's your claim is rejected, and then all the substantiated reasons for rejection, or in fact a reduction to the claim amount. Because the purpose of a response is to convince both parties that the findings are fair in accordance with the contract, and that if either party raises a dispute, it will fail. And what do I see frequently is engineers pushing the contractors towards a dispute because they have dealt with a contention or a claim exceedingly badly and they've not carried out their obligations properly. If we do get in a situation that is heading for a dispute, or a dispute is already beginning to crystallize, so we've submitted a claim, we've had a very basic response which we don't agree with, we still consider as the contractor that we are entitled to an award. What's the next step? The next step is to elevate the matter to a dispute. If we're going that way, don't be afraid to ask for help at project level. Because if things do start going wrong, some expert advice, maybe from your head office with people who are more familiar with disputes and contractual matters, or maybe from an external expert, but some expert advice at an early stage can often help to resolve contentions before they become disputes. And sometimes if that expert advice comes from outside the project, they can look at things more dispassionately than the person who is living and breathing the project every day and has done for the last year or maybe 2 years. an expert looking at the matter can actually sometimes say, you know, Mr. Contractor, you really have no entitled to make this claim, or the amount which you're asking for is vastly inflated. We need to become more realistic about this if you are going to avoid a dispute. So, you know, think about bringing the experts in. If we do actually get to a point where a dispute is occurring or has occurred, again, I would definitely recommend taking it outside the project level and getting some experts involved as soon as possible, because the experts can often defray the dispute and stop it crystallizing before we get into employing lawyers and arbitrators and possibly not adjudicators, because they are there to help. So that brings us to the end of what is quite a brief session. Unfortunately, I've got another meeting I need to attend at 11 o'clock. So, Jen, if we do have a couple of quick questions, I'd be able to answer them quickly, but I must log out at 11 o'clock, I'm afraid.
Okay, then I will close the Q&A box because no one has put a question in the Q&A box, but we do have two hands raised. One is Ojambo Dennis. Would you like to speak? Please do so quickly. If so, I have given you permission to speak.
Yes, I'm just asking if this presentation is possible to be shared on the respective emails for the participants.
Yes, and give me a couple of days to get the replay edited and posted. It will be on the website under the webinar tab, and the presentation slides will be available for download as well.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Oh.
Thank you. And I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this terribly, but Heert de Wilde, if you have a question, I have given you permission to speak as well. Okay, in that case, Andy, if you have time for one quick question. Oh my goodness, the Q&A box is now filling up. And I know you have to go. Andy, there are 3 questions in the Q&A box. Could I send them to you by email and then add the answers to the presentation slides? Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. If you do that, we'll have to do it today because I'm going on vacation. So
Okay, I will.
I'll do my very best, Jen. Just to clarify for people who may not be members that are logged into this webinar, is the recording and the slides available to non-members, or is that a benefit for the members? I think it's the second, isn't it?
This is a public webinar, so this will be available in the members area as well as the public website, both. So yes, I'll just send you those 3 questions straight away, and I will add the answers to the end of the presentation slides.
Okay.
It is 11, so I will thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Andy, for this great presentation. And yeah, I'll get that posted as quickly as possible. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.
Everyone, bye.